So this morning we are thrilled and privileged to have Warren Mack, who we think this is the 5th time he's presented for the BLT, who is going to talk about his creations of beauty that we are all the benefactors of. And his topic is the Glass Menagerie. And I've talked too much already, so Warren, welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that nice introduction, and thank you for inviting me to talk today. And welcome to our little Glass Menagerie, without apologies to Tennessee Williams, because I think a glass zoo is a very nice description of what we have here. Now, I'm going to give a few little explanations at the beginning, and then there's stuff that I'm not going to talk about, and I'll say what that is first. I'm not going to stand up here, cut the glass, solder the glass, and all of that for you, because there are innumerable videos of that on YouTube, and even mine are still up there too, actually, on the church's website, about the technical aspect of making it. No, I have so much to say about the design and the themes and all of that will easily fill our time, and I think you'd be grateful for that. So I'm going to start actually by talking about the windows that are not mine, so that we can be really clear about which windows we're talking about. So just let me get my little book here. And the windows that are not mine are the big rectangular ones, there and there, and they came from a previous church, and what they represent, they're by Brenda Malkinson, and she made them in 1982, and they were in a very hidden part of Knoxnet, so even people from Knoxnet don't necessarily remember them very well, but they fit in here so beautifully, especially with the other themes that I've woven in. So anyway, the symbols from this wonderful book that the Browns made for us. The symbol in these windows are from the United Church crest. They are comprised of important symbols from the three churches that came together to form the United Church of Canada in 1925. The open Bible comes from the Congregationalists, the Holy Spirit dove from the Methodists, and the burning bush comes from the Presbyterians. And the symbols of Alpha and Omega are squeezed in there as well. They're the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, meaning Jesus is the beginning and the end. They symbolize the eternal living God and the fullness of creation. The other window over there is actually just called communion for pretty obvious reasons. And I think it's actually the first major window that Brenda did. And you may notice, if you compare that picture or that window with any previous pictures, that there are 3 horizontal bars across it. I actually reinforced it when I reframed it because it was pretty wobbly. So anyway, those are the windows that I didn't do, except I haven't mentioned the Good Shepherd window at the back as well. And that's the wonderful work of Canada's premier stained glass facility, Robert McCausland stained glass from Toronto. And there's a little bit of my painting on that now too, but I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So, I'd like to talk a little bit about the influences on me. Let me get my slide clicker. Obviously, those McCausland windows would have been one of the major influences on me because I looked at them for 30 years or more at Knoxnet. But the primary influence in my stained glass work is not clicking.
It might have gone to sleep, Warren. If you weren't using it, it might have gone to sleep. On the side, oh, it's green. It should be down there.
It's like one of those little Star Trek phasers, is what I mean. Medieval stained glass has always fascinated me. In fact, I use the phrase, my heart cleaves to the Gothic, because I really like both Gothic architecture and medieval stained glass. I have a photograph of myself in Coventry Cathedral looking at that very window, holding up my hand for the sense of scale and all of that. But you notice they have love the blue and red and the very intricate patterns. And of course their windows are the stories of their faith, largely presented to illiterate people. There are many, many different kinds of stained glass, but another one that has influenced me somewhat is the work of Chagall, who it's just absolutely stunning and brilliant. I can't lay claim to wanting to do his little figures and all of that. That's a very personal thing to his style. But the tonal work and the shading has always influenced me. So, and I'm going to get one other thing out of the way, a terminology thing, so just give me a second. What does stained glass mean? Stained glass means intrinsically colored glass that I buy from the stained glass store, like that. People are so scared of handling glass, I don't know why. I almost never cut myself, but anyway. It is intrinsically colored according to the different metals that they put into it, and that is the color. On top of that, though, a stained glass artist will often do various bits of painting, and I have discovered a craft paint which works incredibly well, and I'll show you what that is. Just go to Michael's and you can get Pbo Paints, which they did not exist 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. They're amazing. You can paint on them in very, very creative ways, and then when you fire them in your oven. Previously, you had to take a vitreous paint, which is actually ground up glass with pigment into it, paint on, which was a real art, and then you had to fire it in a full-fledged, very hot kiln, you know, and if you opened it at the wrong time, you lost your eyebrows from the heat. So I'm really glad that I don't have to do that. But the markings on these windows are permanent unless you want to attack them with serious steel wool and scrape off the markings, so please don't do that. They also supply these wonderful little applicators for text, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, now one last thing to clear out of the way. I didn't join the renovation committee to do stained glass. I joined the renovation committee to get this wonderful acoustic in this room. That was why I was on the committee. It just happened to come up as we were going along that Barb suggested a wall full of stained glass that she'd seen somewhere else and was designing here. And Kevin said, well, we've got a stained glass artist here, so that's how that came about. There was no engineering on that, it was just full chance on that. Okay, so how did this all start? Well, Barb Breed sent me various architectural drawings with blue squares on them where the stained glass would be. And it was my job to find something to go into those. And the first problem is I needed a theme or themes. And I first flirted with the idea of the 4 founding churches. A, that's tiresome, and B, we're so far past that, you know, it's okay to have pictures somewhere, but I don't want that celebrated in the stained glass because that holds a joint church back. So I was really glad to say, even 2 years ago, we were at the stage of saying, no, that's not right. And I wanted each window to sort of have its own color palette, and each one sort of does here. And the last thing, I didn't want to try to vet the themes because I can't work that way. If I had taken these to various committees and stuff, these would not have ever gotten done. I'd have gotten frustrated and go home. So I thought it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, and I just went on and did my best understanding, and I admit I prayed on this quite a bit for what are going to be the right inspirations. So the very first thing that came to me was something to do with Spirit of Hope, obviously. I had fleshed out Barb's architectural drawings with things that I just grabbed off the internet so that I could put color and a little bit of design into the things, and I knew I would change all of that completely. But I grabbed that image sort of, it's not, well, without the logo, I grabbed that image, and without the lines too, off the internet to put into that spot up there. And then I started fiddling around with it, and I put the church's logo on, and switched around backwards, by the way, because it works better with that image. And the color scheme is just so seductive. Isn't that just the most gorgeous color scheme? Couldn't quite match that in the glass that I found, but the problem with it is that the beautiful purple part of the image, well, how would I describe it? People here might remember Gumby and Pokey from the 60s. Does that pink thing not look like a pregnant Gumby? It really, so other than being an extremely gorgeous color scheme, I couldn't quite make it work. So what I did was turn the pink thing into a scroll with the word Spirit of Hope on it, and then start to mess around with the color bands that go through it. Those color bands go through my work a lot, and I don't know how to describe them. They're circumstances of fate or directions of thinking or in there, and they just creep into my work quite a lot. So anyway, that's sort of like what you see up there, but we'll talk about that one last. But I just wanted to say that window, the idea of Spirit of Hope, was the genesis of all of these windows. Because once I thought of that, I thought, Spirit of, that has potential. That could be many different kinds of things. We're not just Spirit of Hope. And so I started brainstorming on Spirit of this and that, Spirit of barbecue, Spirit of whatever. And I settled on ones that I thought really started to convey who we are. So the Spirit of Truth one is the one that took off next, actually, and it's also the very first one that I built. Now, it's a tricky theme, Spirit of Truth. The key to that phrase is the word spirit, not spirit, not truth. Spirit of truth. And I would like this little phrase that came to me, I don't know whether it was at Tim Hortons or where, because I do a lot of creative work at Tim Hortons, but it came to me. The Spirit of Truth is like a searchlight sweeping through the darkness of our confusion and doubts and pausing temporarily to examine the various belief patterns and philosophies of humankind. I kind of rephrase that, but that's the idea. It's showing, and I hope everybody can see around the pulpit, it's showing a searchlight. That is a searchlight at the bottom. You know the big ones that they used to bring? I haven't seen them for a long time, but at big openings of things, they have those things, and they sweep across the sky like that, or the bat signal. That's what that is supposed to be, and that's why there are so many rays of light on there. I went with kind of a medieval representation where I show them all at the same time, because it doesn't move, and so you have to put the motion in there yourself. And the window had only a certain amount of size to fit in, so the things that it was going to temporarily pause on had to be representative groups. So you notice that, I'm going to take the handheld mic now for a second. Okay. Oh, very good. Okay, so down here we have a representation of Buddhism. There is the Star of David for Judaism, Christian cross, and that one is Hindu. I can't tell you which goddess that is that's dancing, but I think Vishnu, but I'm not sure. The native medicine wheel, obviously the crescent and star for Islam. The telescope, what would that be? That is science, right? Because science is one that people use as a belief system many times. I think mistakenly. It's not a belief system, it's an examination system. And I bet you nobody knows what this one is, the book with the question mark. That is an actual symbol of philosophy. So that's what that is. So I couldn't put in every religion on earth because there's thousands of them, but I could put in representative groups. And it doesn't mean, is it still working this one? Yeah. I'll use this one, I like it better. It doesn't mean that we subscribe to every one of them, but it means that we honor them and that we look at them. And we look to see why they are truth to the people that they are truth for. And that's the best you can do, because the spirit of truth is a searching spirit. It is not a spirit that is dug in and stubborn and says, I've got the truth. Now, I did say that this is the first window that I built, and it's the first window I've built in quite a number of years. I've just not really been doing it. And I want to tell you that the first cuts that I made of glass, this is the first piece that I cut. This very long, wide up here, but very narrow down there, piece of glass. And when I was cutting it, it was like cutting a Hope diamond. I was so worried that it was not going to behave properly. But I did okay on it. A couple of the other ones, not quite as okay. And you notice that I have used considerable painting on that. For one thing, every window needed its own title on there, and so with the mottling and the lettering is tricky. I'll talk about that in a second. And again, mottling around the edges of panels makes it look much older and much more interesting. It also gives the depth and the roundness to the beams of light there. So those are all, of course, beams of light. And that is a searchlight. Even though I didn't write as I was going to, I thought, nobody's going to know it's a searchlight. I almost wrote Acme Searchlight Company. I didn't want the Roadrunner to make an appearance. So now, then the next window that I built was actually that one up there, the Spirit of the Land, as it finally came to be called. And I knew that we needed to include an Indigenous reference because we're really going down that road very nicely now. And then that's kind of tricky because it could very easily become gimmicky or tokeny or just smack of phoniness for people saying that these are our symbols when they're not really. So I thought very carefully about what can I put up there that says who we are about that, and I thought we say it every Sunday. The spirit of, or the, what do you call that thing? The acknowledgement of the land. It's a wonderful text, and I thought that would work really well. And I also had seen all of Barb's architectural drawings, and I knew that she was including in the lobby out there, behind the greeting desk, and also other places, reference to the aspen poplar tree, which is important in native thinking. And so I thought, well, that would be a wonderful thing to include in there. So in doing my design, I tried to include it very much like she had out there with rather thicker pieces of wood. And well, the truth is that when I do it like that, it looks like a telegraph pole. And so it doesn't look like a poplar tree, which my significant other was very kind enough to point out in no uncertain terms. And I knew that. I knew that I've never seen a poplar tree with great big fat branches like that. Works out there, but it does not work as a visual image. But you can see that the beginning of the idea of putting the text in there and a bit of a hint of a sunset is already starting to come to pass. But I looked at a lot of poplar trees, and I think I did okay on the representation of that one. I should say that this window, in the original scheme of where these things were going to go, was going to go just there. And I had actually worked very hard on making sure that the words were going to be exactly the right size to read from that height. And I'm really glad that they did the rearrangement of the windows that they did. But it does put that one up a little higher, so you have to get up a bit closer to read it. And I should say, I double-checked the text, because I thought there ought to be a couple of commas or other things in there, but it's the way the text is. You notice that I've tried to include an atmospheric thing. It reads as yellow. I mean, when you see it from a distance, it reads as the yellow window. But there is the hint of a night sky or a morning sky leaving, the night. It can be a sunset or a sunrise. And the orange of sunset and the green of the hill on there. So I tend myself to see it as a sunset, but you are welcome to see it as a sunrise. This was the window that I did just when I came down with COVID. It was kind of really weird, but it actually was pretty good timing because I had my first shot, and so I had a stay-at-home, manageable case of COVID, which just meant I had high fever, and I was exhausted all the time. The exhaustion that comes from that disease is like a lead blanket over top of you, and I was like that for the entire time. But I did have enough energy to work on all of that text, and that's a lot of words to get in there. And this lovely little applicator seems like, and it has a tiny little tip so you can make a really fine line if you need to. Is wonderful, but the more you squeeze and try and do a lot of words, the shakier it gets. And I absolutely can't have the text on a window that's going to be looked at for the next many years with the shakiness. And when it comes out of there, it looks a little bit like it was writing on a cake. It's got that kind of round profile. So that's not good. And my way of dealing with that is I take an X-Acto knife, heat it up in a candle till it's pretty hot. I have to keep doing that over and over again, and scrape away any bit that I don't want until it is exactly the shape and has all of the nice pointy serifs and details, and it is painstaking. It takes 3 times as long to do that work as it does to put the letters on in the first place. So that was more than enough work to occupy my time at home, with the energy that I did have for it, to get that text under control. But it's not too bad. If you paint on stained glass with the vitreous original paint, it's much more liquid and easy to control, and you can paint your lovely details on your letters. This way, I make it do what I want it to do, but it doesn't want to do what I want it to do, but I make it. Now, the next window, I had to wait a little bit to be able to do it because my COVID isolation lasted more than 10 days. They say once I got the text on my phone saying you're released from your quarantine if you don't have a fever. Well, I still did, and my fever continued for 3 more days, and then you have to have 24 days or 24 hours without any kind of fever before you can leave the house. So it was a long time before I could leave the house and go and get the pieces of clear glass that I needed. I should have said that window is totally clear glass. There is no actual stained glass in there. That is a completely painted window. And I did it because I needed to do it that way to get the image that I needed. I did make it in sections so that it's leaded up together, but it is completely clear glass underneath. And so is the next one. The next one is the spirit of creation. I loved the theme of the spirit of creation because in my thinking, we are created in God's image, not because we have 2 eyes or 2 ears or 2 nostrils or whatever. It's because we are created in the creative image of God and in the loving image of God as well. We are capable of both of those things, and to me that's what that means. And I've been blessed with a number of pretty creative gifts, and I'm very, very grateful for that one. So that one is also completely and totally painted all the way through because the image is so complex in there. I wanted to include references to all kinds of forms of creativity. People so often have the idea that the stuff in the art gallery or the stuff in the churches in Europe, that's art and creative, but it's not, and they haven't shown their wonderful quilt or their incredible knitting or their wonderful clay thing or all of that. And all of those are expressions of that same spirit. So I wanted to include them all. But the one that is art imitating life, imitating art, is the top one. If you see that at the top, you have an image of Michelangelo painting the creation of, he called it the creation of man, or creation of Adam, from the Sistine ceiling, which was really fun to try and draw, I have to say. And I did okay on it. Yes, Michelangelo did stand to paint the Sistine ceiling. He did not lie on his back. We know this because he wrote a little letter to a friend of his and did a little drawing of himself working exactly in that pose. And he said the skin on his neck grew very long and hung down like a snake or something when he put his head down. The scaffolding, that is another matter to represent. I know it looks like a scissors lift, but it's scaffolding. He had to get up, 60 feet in the air. So anyway, so that's a human being creating an image of God, creating man in a window about creation. So I think that's kind of cool. I've got dancers in there, absolutely adore dance. I've got someone knitting at the top there, because I admire that and I can't do that. A teacher here, a composer, could have been Bach, but it is Beethoven. Kids making a snowman, because that's exactly what when people are creating stuff, they're following that urge, that creation. This is an author. Here's a medical researcher. It may not seem like creation, but it certainly is. Then engineers, and they're actually working on this bridge there. And I had fun because at that time, the Mars Perseverance lander had just had its incredibly successful landing, and everybody was awfully excited about that. And so I included that in there. If I'd done it today, I would have put the James Webb Space Telescope up there as well. But those are all expressions of the same thing. And they come to us through the action of mind. How the heck do you represent a mind? That's hard. So I chose a brain instead. And the brain, you notice, this is why I did it on clear glass. The brain has rays of creation coming out of it, and they even continue down there. That is how I chose to represent the idea of the mind shooting forth all of that creative energy. And I really had a fun time painting that brain, let me tell you. So the next window that I did, I knew that we definitely had to have some reference to our LGBT connection. As a gay man, I knew that we had to do that. And that's who we are. So then, this is one that was a real challenge because the window kept changing shape in the designs that I was being given by Barb. The first one was broad and fatter, and it was not too hard to put a rainbow on that, but then it changed. It changed radically into a window that's 8 inches wide by 6.5 feet high with an angled top. And I thought, how the heck am I going to get a rainbow in that? If I put a rainbow just, a little arc at the bottom, it's lost, and what do I do with the rest of the space? So I thought, gotta be a different kind of rainbow, and I just drew the shape of the window and took my pencil and fiddled around with curves till I came up with one that I like. And again, my partner calls this a very flirty rainbow. And the one thing that I would do differently, I don't want to give a list of the things that I would change, but I would have put the word loves in white, because it just is slightly lost in the colors of the rainbow there. There's a lot of pieces of colored glass on there, and I did have to adapt the colors of the already colored glass with the paint that I used in order to get a proper looking rainbow. So virtually every piece of glass on there is colored as well as being stained glass. And as I say, you can't do a curve with so many different elements to it without doing an awful lot of little pieces. But you don't notice that from where you're sitting. You just notice this wonderful color streak. So I was very proud to put that window in there. I should say something about the challenge that these narrow windows offered to me, especially that one. I was really worried when I saw at the beginning that I'm going to have to make a window that is, I think, 10 inches wide and 8 feet high. I thought, okay, I know that the systems of zinc around the edges that I've seen in stained glass work on smaller panels, but it's not going to work on something that has to hold its stability to a height of 8 feet. So I really racked my brains on that and looked at all sorts of lumber stores to see if there was a wood product that I would be able to use, and I didn't find one. Now, I happen to have a nephew who works in the metal industry, doing framing for buildings and all of that. I thought he would know, and oh my gosh, he really came through for me. He brought me this product right here. This is called res-bar, or reinforcing bar, and this is the stuff that they use when they do metal framing, steel 2x4s. They put this in there in various sizes to reinforce it. And it is strong. You could not bend this stuff if you tried, and it is very stable. And you could solder it because it's galvanized. And I thought, that's great. And if I can add to that, a wood frame around it, and so I screw the res bar onto the wood, and most of these are framed with smaller wood than this. I use this size wood for the Brenda Malkinson windows. It gives a really very manageable frame, and one that is not that hard to build. I still have to solve the problem of the narrow stained glass and the wide channel. I've been trying various solutions for that. Haven't come up with the perfect one yet, but I'm working on it. But, so, I would not have been able to do a window that is 8 inches wide by 6.5 feet high if I did not have this kind of a framing system. I just would not have been able to do it. So I was really grateful that my nephew Josh found this stuff for me, and it's available easily in Edmonton, and it's not very expensive. So that got us through framing those more difficult windows. That takes us through to that window over there, which is now called Spirit of Prayer, but it went through an awful lot of changes. At first, it was a much smaller size, and Spirit of Love sounded like a good theme as I was doing, Spirit of Barbecue and Spirit of whatever. Spirit of Love seemed a good theme, but how do you represent that? That is really hard. But I thought, well, the Holy Spirit dove could enter into that. And then it changed again. See, it's the other way now, too. The angle is the other way. I thought, okay, Spirit of Faith. That's a little easier to represent because praying hands could do it. But it was about this time that we were discussing what to do with the Good Shepherd window back there. And it had been suggested that we needed to do a cosmetic alteration to Jesus and make him look less Canadian and Caucasian and make him look more like what he really would have looked like, a Middle Eastern Semitic Jew. And so I've done that on that window at the back. You may have not noticed that, but I have done the change to Jesus to make that more correct. So someone at Choir Zoom on Monday, I always get my ideas at Choir Zoom on Monday because I bounce them off a lot of people. Someone said, you better be careful what color you make those hands. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but it was really true. It could be a very excluding sort of an image if it's like that. So I went to town and I thought, okay, what do I do with that? And I searched the internet and I found this, which is a neon version of Albrecht Dürer's Praying Hands. And I thought, okay, I can do that. I can do that in stained glass because all I have to do is use colored glass and color or clear glass and color around it. And so you see that the Albrecht Dürer Praying Hands up there kind of look like they glow with a neon light in that way. And still got the Holy Spirit dove from 2 windows ago, but I thought, okay, it had already by this time in my head transformed to Spirit of Prayer, but it would go back and forth. But Spirit of Prayer, okay. We are a very inclusive and exploring church, and I thought we have a Native connection, so I better include an image of Native prayer. And I dug up from the internet one which I loved, absolutely loved the image. It had wonderful spiky feathers and frills and all of that. And visually it was a really good image. But I had good counsel from someone that that's not an image that modern day Indigenous population might identify with. In fact, it might be offensive to them. And so I modernized it a bit and just left the, we call it ponytail, and the posture. And I think it still works. But the other one, I'm reminded of a Monty Python skit. I should say, there's a skit where Monty Python and that gang were pretending to be Leonardo da Vinci meeting the Pope, and it was Michelangelo meeting the Pope, and Michelangelo did not paint the Last Supper, but in this skit, he did, and the Pope is berating him for how it doesn't look right, and he finally says, well, Michelangelo, why have you painted this with 3 Christs in it? And he says, it works, mate. The fat one balances the 2 skinny ones. So sometimes as an artist, you get preoccupied with the visual of the thing and forget the other important things there. So I was glad to be reminded of that. And that has its own color scheme as well. You've got the red and its complementary color green there, and that's a very popular window. So that brings us back to the last one that I built for the front, which was the Spirit of Hope window, and I talked about that already, but I want to talk about a happy accident that happened in there. You saw that I was wrestling with the colors of trying to get those ravishing mauves and purples in there, and I kind of succeeded, but didn't entirely. If you look on the left side, both at the top and at the bottom, you see there's a small sliver or arc of what is quite a brown colored glass. It was supposed to be a much more purple glass, but when I fired it, it was that, and I didn't have what I needed, so I went with it. And when the window was finished, I thought, I don't know about that. I'm going to tell you what, that's the work of the Holy Spirit in there, because what those 2 arcs can represent is the opposite of Spirit of Hope. And to me, the opposite of Spirit of Hope, and I've seen it demonstrated in some people, is a spirit of doubt and fear. That's the opposite of a spirit of hope. And you can't have one without the other, as much as you would like to. So in our Spirit of Hope window, you can perceive it as driving out the spirit of doubt and fear, or a slight intrusion of the spirit of doubt and fear. But those 2 are the 2 angels on their shoulders, whether you like it or not. They will always be there. And again, just notice that I've turned the logo around there for purposes of the way it sits in the image. And I thought I need to do the words from both angles, so you get it either way, like that. So, what I want to show you right now will lead to talking about the side windows. There were many discussions about what the order of all these windows should be. And again, Barbara was always sending me these drawings that just had the blue things, and I would take my GIMP program and fill them in. And this is one of the first ones that she sent me. And it had all of the Brandon Wilkinson windows at the front. And I had to point out to Barb that 3 of them are a set, and one of these things is not like the other at all. The communion window, as beautiful as it is, absolutely doesn't go with those ones. And she had to agree, so we started experimenting with different arrangements, and there's another possible arrangement. You can see that I'm dealing with the older versions of all of those windows, and there's no spirit of creation in there at all yet. And that one I kind of liked. I thought that was a good one, but she went off in a different direction. She decided to take the communion window right off the front and make an entirely new feature wall on the side, which I wasn't expecting, especially when she told me, well, you have to do 4 new stained glass windows for it. Because I was expecting to do 6, not 10. And that's perfectly fine. I was right in the groove of doing stained glass. But again, what am I going to do with those side windows? I knew I wanted them to be abstract, but what does that mean? All different kinds of abstract, and should they have any themes, or should they just be cool colored glass? So I looked again at some of the other influences that are on me. I remembered a trip that Romy and I took to Austria, but we stopped in Switzerland for 3 days. And in Switzerland we have the Gross Münster, which is the church that Hildreich Zwingli, the Swiss reformer, don't say Zwingli, it's Zwingli, that he taught at, and one more. And we went to that church because I wanted to see this organ, and just by the most wonderful luck, there was an organ recital that night. So I got to hear that wonderful organ. I've never got a chance to play it yet, but there's always time. It showed me some really remarkable stained glass at the front of that church, which looks like that. And the cool thing about that glass, and there's much more of it around the church, is the amount of black that's in it. The black really brought out the color and just absolutely popped there. So that was one possible influence. Another possible influence was Mark Chagall, because also in Zurich, in the very old Fraumünster Kirche, there are 5 windows by Mark Chagall, all with wonderful different color schemes. And I thought, maybe I should try to master that style or assimilate it. But that was not really what I wanted. Then I remembered a trip to England where I went to Coventry Cathedral, which I love. I've been there a couple of times, 3 times I think now. And they have a magnificent baptistry window there. It's the full height of the cathedral, 90 feet high. Probably it's kind of dark, but this rock right there is yay big, and it's the baptismal font carved into it. It's a rock from Jerusalem, actually, I'm told. And it's just a stunning window, but don't ask the verger at the cathedral. He says that's hated it. It's wonderful. And I looked at it, and these patterns of glass really spoke to me. I thought, I can do something with that. And it's very clear that that was a huge influence on me if you look at those side windows there. And so I decided that is the style that I'm going to assimilate in my own way, not slavishly copy, but assimilate. And I should say that we went back and forth as to whether there were 3 windows or 4. And I got an email, and I thought the matter was settled. I thought we were going to only have 3, not the big square one at the bottom there. And I thought that was done, so I did those 3 windows. And then I got an email saying, "You've forgotten the 4th window." And I thought, we agreed there wasn't going to be a 4th window, I thought. But in the meantime, the themes had occurred to me. The learning, changing, growing together had been mentioned again at a choir Zoom meeting, and I thought, those are pretty good themes for those side windows. I like those, but it would have only been learning, changing, growing without the other window. So I was going to ask Barb if we could include a 4th window that said growing. So I sent her an email saying, I'm actually very happy for this little misunderstanding because I wanted that 4th window all along, which wasn't true, but anyway, it came about. What I've learned from doing those particular windows is color. All of them I designed just with my GIMP program, which has a spray function on it. So I would take the shape of the window and I would just spray areas of color, and then I would take that and spend a very long time seeing how can I turn that into stained glass, and that's what I did. And all of them came about that way. And there's lots of transitions. All of what I learned about how to paint with that Pbo paint really came in handy here, because almost none of the glass on there is the exact color that it came to me from the stained glass store. I altered absolutely everything. And I also had to paint all those words on there, but that was not so much. That was easy. I'm told I'm not supposed to say this particular way, but I think it's really true. You take a mosaic pattern like that, beautiful mosaic pattern, I love those, and superimpose a word on it, a meaningful word, and pow, you've got meaning. And I was told, don't say that because it makes it sound cheap, but it does not. It makes it sound efficient. And so it really does. It's how I didn't want to then say, okay, these are the ways, little pictures of people learning and all of that. That is not gonna cut it on there. So you just, the word says it all. And I did include, as I went along, variations in the pattern work that sort of tried to convey what the word of the text was a little bit, but I'm not going to tell you what they are. You're going to have to search for them just like the fossils. I'll tell you about the circle. In together, there's a circle at the bottom that represents together for me. But the other ones you have to find, and you'll probably find ones that I didn't put in, and that's perfectly okay. So that's the story of the creation of all of these windows. I'm deeply grateful to have been asked to do this work. It's been one of the most satisfying things I have ever done in my life, I have to say. And I'm grateful to the people at Chagall for having done such a staggeringly good job of mounting them. And the lighting guys I have never seen such good lighting on stained glass in my life. It's usually spotty and terrible, but this is magnificent. So it presents a really wonderful thing, which I guess I maybe can call my legacy here. So that concludes the formal part of my talk. I'm totally receptive to questions at this point, so if you have any questions. No questions?
Warren, would you explain why you're not going to be changing light bulbs behind there?
I wish I knew. It's LED lighting behind there, and that lasts forever. And you can still take the windows out. In fact, after I'd finished them, all of the windows, they all stayed in my house for quite a long time, longer than I was comfortable with, because there was always a danger of, bumping the vacuum into them or something. And they built the slots for them. And that tells you there was a special worry that I had, even though I had sent the exact sizes of all these windows to Matt at Chagall's. I was thinking, what if these things don't fit into the areas that they've carved out for them? But if they didn't tell me about it, and they seem to have fit perfectly anyway. But they had the slots for them first, and they mounted them into those places. And then later they took them out again while the electrician came in and did the work. So you can unscrew the metal framing that you see, and then you would go in and just simply unscrew the window, which is just screwed into the back, to take that up to do any changing of light bulbs that needs to be done. But the LED lights will last a very long time.
Just a comment. When we did the leadership team tour, and they were talking to us about how they liked the boxes, they used paper sheets with LED. So it's just a strip of paper, and that's how it has such a smooth lighting rather than pinpoint LED lights.
Those of you who watched the videos that I sent around as I was doing these windows, you notice I would keep putting it on the light table, which is now in my office. It's just a fluorescent fixture. And it would always have these two horrible yellow strips down the middle of it because that's the way the camera reacted to the fluorescent light. I eventually took to putting a piece of paper over top of the light table to even it out, and it worked a lot better. So it's a really good trick, and honestly, it's the best. And I might build a new light table on that technology, which would be a lot smaller, lighter, and more effective, and perhaps the size that I need, because the Spirit of Hope window, the Spirit of Creation window, which is in 3 sections now, I got smart, and the rainbow window, or the Spirit of Inclusion, but you can call it the rainbow window or the God Loves Everybody window. They needed a much longer light table than I had, and they needed a longer work table too, the work desk than I had. So I could never quite see it until they were done, and I could put them up in my patio door and watch the light come from them that way. So it would be nice to have a 6 or even 8 foot light table, but my kitchen won't allow an 8 foot light table. That's where I work, by the way. Questions or comments? Well, I will thank you again for having come. I thank the church for having asked me to do these windows, and have a good morning.
Warren, and thank you very much for your talents. God has blessed you with art, with music. We can't thank you enough for what you contribute to us. Here's a small token of our appreciation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.